We are the second wave of Irish soldiers to be sent into the Congo.
Jesus fucking snake!
The compound is a joke. We're wide open.
Some battles are erased not because they were lost, but because they proved the system was wrong. The Siege of Jadotville is not just a war story. It's a lesson in how power reacts when ordinary men expose extraordinary failure. Fact 1. Jadotville is really about political fear, not combat. On the surface, the Siege of Jadotville looks like a military standoff. Underneath, it's a story about political panic. The real fear wasn't enemy fire, loss of territory, casualties. The real fear was embarrassment. A small peacekeeping unit successfully defending itself exposed weak UN planning, confused mandates, fragile authority. Institutions fear competence in the wrong place because it reveals incompetence above. Fact 2. The soldiers became a problem simply by surviving. This is one of the strangest truths behind Jadotville. If the soldiers had been wiped out, they would have been remembered as martyrs, but they survived, and survival created problems: questions, accountability, scrutiny. By living, they forced leaders to explain, why were they isolated? Why was support denied? Why were orders unclear? Survival made silence impossible, so silence was enforced. Fact 3. Jadotville shows how institutions protect themselves first. In the film's political subtext, one truth becomes clear. Institutions don't protect people, they protect themselves. After the siege, reports were softened, language was reframed, responsibility was blurred, not to find truth, but to maintain appearance. The film quietly asks, if the system failed, why punish those who proved it? Fact 4. The UN is portrayed as an idea, not a shield. Unlike typical portrayals, the UN in Jadotville is not evil, but it is fragile. It is shown as slow, cautious, afraid of escalation. The film suggests that peacekeeping structures are built on image management, not readiness. When violence breaks through, those structures crack instantly. Fact 5. The battle threatened international narratives, not borders. Jadotville didn't threaten nations, it threatened stories. The story that peacekeeping works smoothly, neutrality prevents violence, authority ensures safety. The soldiers' success proved something uncomfortable. Peacekeeping without power is theater, and institutions hate when the curtain falls. Fact 6. Jadotville shows how silence is used as a political weapon. Silence is not absence. Silence is design. After the siege, there was no clear explanation, no public acknowledgement, and no immediate correction of false narratives. This wasn't forgetfulness, it was strategy. By saying nothing, institutions allowed doubt to grow, misinterpretations to spread, responsibility to dissolve. Silence didn't erase the story, it blurred it. Fact 7. The film exposes how language is softened to hide failure. One of the most disturbing political tricks shown in Jadotville is language manipulation. Words like strategic withdrawal, operational limitation, and complex circumstances replace words like abandonment, isolation, and failure. The film reveals how language is used not to explain events, but to make them emotionally distant. If it sounds complicated enough, no one asks who was responsible. Fact 8. The soldiers' confidence threatened authority. Ironically, the soldiers' discipline and calm behavior worked against them politically. They did not break down publicly, protest loudly, or demand recognition. Their professionalism made it easier to ignore them. The film suggests a painful truth. The system rewards chaos more than competence. Quiet confidence doesn't generate headlines, it generates inconvenience. Fact 9. Jadotville demonstrates how neutrality can become cowardice. Neutrality is presented as virtue in peacekeeping, but Jadotville asks a dangerous question. What happens when neutrality protects failure? The film implies that neutrality prevented escalation, but also prevented rescue. By refusing to choose sides, leadership chose inaction. And in crisis, inaction is still a decision, with consequences. Fact 10. The film shows that being right can be politically dangerous. The soldiers at Jadotville were tactically correct. That was the problem. Their success raised questions leaders weren't ready to answer. Why were they isolated? Why was support denied? Why were warnings ignored? Being right exposed systemic weakness, and systems rarely forgive those who expose them. Fact 11. Jadotville shows how delayed recognition is a form of control. Recognition didn't come because leaders suddenly became brave. It came because time made it safe. Years passed. Officials retired. Documents lost urgency. By the time honors were discussed, no careers were at risk, no policies had to change, no apologies carried consequences. The film suggests something chilling. Delayed justice protects the powerful, not the forgotten. Fact 12. The film reveals institutional guilt without ever naming it. No character stands up and says, "We failed." Instead, guilt appears indirectly: awkward conversations, avoided eye contact, careful wording. This mirrors real institutions. They rarely admit guilt outright. They let it leak through behavior. Jadotville captures that discomfort perfectly. Fact 13. The soldiers were forced to carry the burden of silence. While institutions stayed quiet, the soldiers had to live publicly. They returned home to confusion instead of praise, questions instead of answers, rumors instead of facts. The film shows how silence transfers weight. What leaders refuse to explain, soldiers are forced to absorb. That psychological burden lasts longer than combat. Fact 14. Jadotville exposes how history is managed, not recorded. History in the film doesn't feel like a record, it feels like a negotiation. What gets written depends on political convenience, international image, bureaucratic comfort. The battle wasn't erased, it was reframed, and reframing is often more effective than denial. Fact 15. The movie suggests that waiting for justice is its own trauma. For the soldiers, the waiting never ended. Waiting to be understood, waiting to be believed, waiting to be acknowledged. Jadotville treats this waiting as a second siege, one without gunfire, but with lasting psychological damage. Time didn't heal them, it isolated them. Fact 16. Jadotville proves moral victory often comes without permission. The soldiers never received permission to be heroes, no official approval, no public validation, no institutional blessing. Yet morally, they won the moment they protected each other, refused unnecessary sacrifice, maintained discipline under abandonment. The film argues that moral victory does not require recognition, only integrity. Fact 17. Recognition finally came when it no longer cost anything. When official acknowledgement eventually arrived, it felt hollow. Why? Because by then, decision-makers were gone, policies had moved on, damage had already settled. The film makes a brutal point. Institutions often apologize only when apologies are safe. Recognition becomes symbolic, not corrective. Fact 18. Jadotville shows that institutions fear precedent more than truth. If Jadotville had been openly acknowledged early, it would have created precedent, accountability, reform, admission of failure. The film suggests that fear of precedent delayed justice, because once one failure is admitted, others begin demanding the same honesty. Truth threatens systems more than lies ever do. Fact 19. The film turns forgotten soldiers into a mirror for the audience. By the end, Jadotville stops talking only about soldiers. It talks about us. How many truths do we accept only after they're no longer urgent? How often do we confuse silence with resolution? How many people are told, wait, until waiting becomes life? The film quietly hands responsibility to the viewer. Fact 20. The Siege of Jadotville is ultimately about power losing control. At its core, this is not a war story. It is a story about what happens when power fails, authority hesitates, and ordinary people refuse to collapse. The final victory is not military, it is historical, because no matter how long it took, the truth survived the silence. The Siege of Jadotville doesn't end with applause. It ends with accountability arriving late and dignity surviving anyway. It reminds us that institutions forget, power deflects, but integrity remembers. If you believe history should tell the truth, not just the comfortable version, if you want stories about forgotten victories, silenced courage, and people who did the right thing without permission, subscribe now. Because this channel isn't here to repeat official narratives, it's here to uncover the stories power hoped you'd never question.